We're going to look at another shockingly sad story today. This beautiful young woman with her whole life ahead of her goes missing, and the whole town was on edge. Family and friends coming to grips with the shocking murder of Rebecca Gould. The police found this very bloody crime scene. So, watch this video until the end. It will be very interesting. Initially, the police entertained the possibility that she had departed for another location, but subsequently they discovered highly unsettling evidence. The truth of her fate remained undisclosed for 16 years until it was unexpectedly revealed. Rebecca Gould was born on April 28, 1982, in the small American town of Melbourne, Arkansas. She had 3 sisters, but shortly after the youngest was born, their parents divorced. The girls stayed with their mother, but continued to spend time with their dad. At first, they struggled with their parents' separation, but eventually, it made them even closer to each other. They spent a lot of time together, always looking out for one another. After graduating from high school, Rebecca enrolled at Northwest Arkansas Community College and relocated to Fayetteville. One of her sisters was already attending this college, so they had the opportunity to see each other practically every day. The sisters always tried to visit their family whenever they had the chance, even though their home was just about 25 miles from their college. Sometimes, it was quite challenging to find time between studies. In September 2004, when Rebecca was 22, she was anticipating the start of a new semester at her college. For a while, she had been considering transferring to the University of Arkansas, and finally, she got the opportunity. However, before making the move, Rebecca planned to complete one more semester at her current college. Before the semester began, she and her sister decided to go home for the weekend to visit their family. Rebecca also had a boyfriend who lived in a nearby town. She planned to spend time with her relatives and then stay with her boyfriend. On Sunday, September 19, the sisters drove home, spent some time with their loved ones, and Rebecca left to see her boyfriend. The next day, she was supposed to pick up her sister and head back as they had come there in Rebecca's car. However, she didn't show up at the agreed time. Her sister tried calling multiple times, but Rebecca never answered. At first, her family members didn't worry too much. Rebecca was an adult, and they thought maybe she was just catching up on sleep before heading back to college or spending time with some friends. But by the evening, as time had passed with no sign of Rebecca, her family started to worry. They now hoped Rebecca had just decided to stay in town for one more day and would eventually return home. The next day, their worry reached its peak. Rebecca still hadn't contacted any of her relatives, and none of her friends had seen her. That's when Rebecca's mom decided to contact the police. Officers learned that Rebecca had stayed with her boyfriend Casey and went to his workplace. He said the last time he saw her was the previous morning. Around 8:30 a.m., Rebecca dropped him off at the cafe where he worked. She then planned to return to his place, pack her things, and meet up with her sisters before leaving. Casey added that Rebecca had promised to pick him up from work, but she never showed. He waited for her in the parking lot, then called his friends, and they all went to a party. The police listened to his account and asked Casey to allow them to search his home, and he gave them permission. The first thing they noticed was Rebecca's car was still parked outside. Inside the house, they found her purse with IDs and her dog. Casey also mentioned she had a small suitcase with some clothes, but it was not found in the house. This started to seem odd. No one had seen Rebecca for a whole day, yet her purse, car, and beloved pet were still at Casey's place. But it wasn't all. One of the officers noticed the mattress didn't have any bedding and was placed on the bed rather unevenly. Lifting it, the police found large red stains resembling blood. The officers then searched the house more thoroughly and found more blood stains on the floor and wallpaper. In the washing machine, they found bedding with blood stains. They also noticed a significant amount of bleach bottles in the house, suggesting that someone had attempted to clean up blood stains. All this pointed to a grim conclusion that Rebecca might not be alive anymore. Although investigators couldn't find any additional evidence in the house, they also weren't sure if the blood belonged to her, as DNA analysis results would take several days. While forensic experts continued to examine the house, detectives began questioning Rebecca's boyfriend. He could have been the last person to see her before her disappearance, and a large amount of blood was found in his house. Casey stated he had no involvement in Rebecca's disappearance. According to him, the last time he saw her was the previous morning, and since then, Rebecca hadn't been in touch. He mentioned that after spending the night with friends, he returned home to change before his next shift. However, he insisted he hadn't seen any blood splatters on the floor or walls and didn't smell bleach. He also didn't think much of Rebecca's car parked outside or some of her belongings left in the room. The police didn't rush to take his word for it, but at that point, they didn't have any substantial evidence to suspect him of murder. They decided to interview all his friends with whom Casey spent Monday night, and they confirmed that he was indeed with them until the morning. They provided him with an alibi, and the police continued to look for any other clues. They still had no idea what happened to Rebecca and when exactly she disappeared. All they knew was that she hadn't answered any calls since the morning of the previous day. During the conversation with investigators, Casey had suggested they should look into Rebecca's ex-boyfriend named Justin. The police tried to reach out to him, but he wasn't home and didn't answer any calls. This seemed suspicious. He disappeared at the same time as his ex-girlfriend. However, 2 days later, he got in touch and said he had been at a casino with his father. The police were able to confirm his alibi, and he was indeed out of town. Soon, detectives got another lead. They had been trying to reconstruct the timeline of events on the day of her disappearance and found out Rebecca had stopped at a gas station near Casey's workplace. She bought herself a sandwich for breakfast and headed towards his house. Employees recognized her from a photo and confirmed she came there after 8:30 a.m., aligning with Casey's account. The police also found the same sandwich in his house untouched. This indicated that Rebecca returned home, and shortly after that, something happened to her. Considering Casey was at work at this time, it once again raised doubts about his involvement. Soon the police received the results of the blood analysis found in his house. It matched Rebecca's blood, and experts didn't find any samples of foreign DNA among it. Detectives continued their efforts to solve the case by interviewing all of Rebecca's relatives and friends. They considered that if Rebecca was indeed attacked, it could have been someone close to her with a personal motive. Police also scrutinized all of Casey's friends who might have visited his house, but all efforts yielded no results. This went on until September 27, a week after her disappearance. Investigators discovered Rebecca's body approximately 12 miles from her boyfriend's house. It lay at the base of an embankment near the highway. This area wasn't visible from the road, making it nearly impossible to stumble upon the body accidentally. They also noted that whoever left her there hadn't even tried to conceal or bury the body. Apparently, the perpetrator just drove there, dumped her, and left. Medical experts determined that Rebecca sustained multiple blows to the head with a heavy object, and her cause of death was strangulation. No defensive wounds were found on her body, indicating that the victim was completely caught off guard, possibly without even having time to realize what was happening. Experts also found no evidence of sexual assault. Regarding the time of death, they also thought Rebecca's body had been lying there for a week, but experts couldn't provide a more precise estimation. Meanwhile, the detectives identified the possible murder weapon used by the perpetrator. There was a piano in Casey's house missing one of its legs. They were quite heavy, and medical experts confirmed that their shape matched the head injury on the victim. Casey claimed the missing leg had been loose for a while, and in theory, it could have been easily ripped from its base. However, the police failed to find this leg either in the house or near the location where the body was found. Given the complete absence of evidence, detectives began searching for possible motives for this crime. They immediately ruled out the robbery gone wrong. Nothing was missing from the house except for the piano leg and Rebecca's suitcase. A sexual motive was also dismissed, leading investigators to believe that the killer simply wanted to murder her. Considering Rebecca was killed almost immediately after her return to Casey's house, police speculated that the perpetrator might have been aware of her schedule or had been following her, knowing her boyfriend would be at work that morning. It was also very likely that Rebecca knew the perpetrator. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting she might have let them in herself. According to investigators, the killer spent several hours in the house, attempting to clean up the blood with bleach. After that, they likely carried the body and loaded it into the car to drive it to the embankment. Despite all this, detectives had literally no evidence, so there was no progress in the investigation. They considered the possible involvement of hundreds of people, including acquaintances and relatives of both Rebecca and Casey. They also checked neighbors and even residents of nearby towns, but it led nowhere. Police received numerous tips, but none proved useful. In many cases, locals just voiced their suspicions against other people without backing it up with any real facts. This went on for several months until the case eventually went cold. Investigators continued to work on it, but they couldn't make any progress. In the following years, the case was reopened several times, passing on to new teams of detectives, but each time it led nowhere. The problem lay not only in the complete absence of evidence, but also in the lack of understanding the perpetrator's motive. Eventually, the mysterious nature of this case attracted attention from the true crime community. It became the subject of various TV shows and podcasts where people attempted to finally uncover the truth. One such individual was a journalist named George Jared, who had been following the case from the beginning. He even wrote a book about it and launched his own podcast. For many years, he had been trying to find out who killed Rebecca. One day, he met Jennifer Buchholz, a former counterintelligence officer in the U.S. Army who was also interested in the case. They decided to join forces and created a Facebook group where they shared their thoughts on the investigation, discussing it with subscribers. In the first few months, they started noticing a subscriber named William Miller who caught their attention for two reasons. The first was that he lived in the Philippines. His interest in an unsolved crime in a small American town from the other side of the world seemed strange. Miller was also one of the most active subscribers, leaving numerous comments and even reaching out to the group admins via direct messages. He said he wanted to help solve the murder, shared his thoughts on some controversial and unclear moments, and put forth his own theories. He demonstrated a high level of awareness, not only with specific facts from the case, but also with the knowledge of the area where the crime occurred. Eventually, George and Jennifer began to consider his behavior quite suspicious. They decided to keep this thought to themselves to not scare him off, and try to extract more information. Soon, they discovered something else. One of the group members was an expert in genealogy, and she tried to understand Miller's connection to the case. With a simple analysis of his profile, she discovered a very unexpected fact. Miller turned out to be Casey's cousin. After this revelation, George and Jennifer decided to contact the detectives on Rebecca's case and share their concerns about his activity. Police reviewed the case files and realized that Miller's name had been there from the beginning. It turned out he had visited the town around the time of the murder in 2004. Miller was already questioned, saying he came from Texas to help another relative. He mentioned visiting Casey twice, 2 days before Rebecca's disappearance and the next day. The second time, he didn't even enter the house. Rebecca spotted him through the window and informed Casey that someone was standing there. He went outside, spoke with his cousin for about 15 minutes, and Miller left. Back then, he didn't raise any suspicions, but now detectives were taking a keen interest in him. Digging deeper, they found out that Miller had been a suspect in several cases. In 2002, he faced charges of assaulting a minor and later for attacking his ex-wife after breaking into her home. However, he didn't face any punishment in either of these cases. Later, he moved to the Philippines, got married, had kids, and worked on offshore oil rigs. Police wanted to talk to him again, but without him being in the US, it was practically impossible. They also couldn't contact him, so they had to wait for him to return home. This happened only in 2020. Customs informed detectives that Miller came back to the US and returned to Oregon, where his mother lived. Detectives called her, but she claimed not to have seen her son for a long time, even though they knew he was in town. Realizing she was lying, detectives decided to go there and bring him in for questioning. Considering there was no evidence against him, the police needed a plan. If Miller had any connection to the murder, they desperately needed to obtain his confession. So, the detectives decided to play it smart. Detective Mike McNeil, who led the investigation, started the interrogation casually, stating they were just re-interviewing everyone involved in the case. Miller replied that he was willing to cooperate and had nothing to hide. The detective asked if he would be okay with taking a polygraph test. Upon her return to Arkansas, Miller agreed. Then the detective pretended to call the local police chief, asking if there were any polygraph specialists in town by chance. Hearing this, Miller became visibly nervous and tried to change the subject. Meanwhile, the detective pretended to talk on the phone and said that a polygraph specialist would arrive at the station in half an hour. What Miller didn't know is that the specialist was already waiting in the next room. Despite the fact that the polygraph is a pretty controversial tool and its results can't be accepted in court, the detectives had other goals. This unexpected turn of events could catch the suspect off guard and ultimately lead to a confession. Miller asked if polygraph results were admissible in court, and the detective vaguely said they could be in certain scenarios but didn't specify how unlikely that was. Miller continued to get nervous but agreed to the test, which he failed.
You see in the middle is a little box that says cause Rebecca Gould's death, and then it says intentional or accidental. And I'm going to read these boxes to you, right? So when I say, if I ask you, did you cause that woman's death? I'm asking you if you shot Rebecca causing her death. Your answer would be
no.
Okay. And we'll go to the next box. It says you struck Rebecca with an object causing her death. What would your answer be?
No.
And then if I ask, you caused Rebecca's death, and the box is
no.
Did you slam Rebecca against something causing her death?
No.
Okay. Did you strangle Rebecca causing her death?
No.
Okay. Did you asphyxiate Rebecca causing her death?
No.
Did you drown Rebecca causing her death?
No.
Or you stabbed Rebecca causing
No.
her death? Or you shot Rebecca causing her death?
No.
Okay. So when I ask you, did you cause Rebecca's death, we're talking about this case, right? The answer is
No.
Perfect. How hard is that to answer that question?
Not hard at all.
Right? That's the test, right? That's that. There's some other questions we're going to ask. We're going to go over those. That's what people, that's what
So that's, how many questions there?
No, just one question, right? So when I ask you, did you cause her death, right? I'm talking about all those things. So when I ask you that, that's what that means, right? Did you cause her death, right? The answer is no. I'm seeing you're calm, you're cool, collected. You're not don't have that anxiety, the nervousness, right? Because we're talking, right?
Yeah.
And I'm explaining to you all the little details.
A better understanding of a lot of stuff. You're making it a lot easier and all this stuff because I'm thinking the worst that, I'm innocent and I come in here and take a lie detector test and hypothetically I fail. My thought, jail.
So the results on the exam of deception indicated, right? So as to the questions of did you,
what do you mean by that?
You failed the test.
I failed the test.
Yes.
The polygraph operator concluded that he had lied about all key questions, including involvement in Rebecca's murder. Detective McNeil continued pressing him and told Miller that experts once again analyzed all the available evidence and found Rebecca's DNA in samples collected from his car. They had searched his vehicle back in 2004, but found nothing and hadn't even taken any samples for further examination. So there was no Rebecca's DNA found in his car, and the detective deliberately misled Miller. By law, police have the right to use such tactics during interrogation to get a confession. Sometimes criminals indeed decide to confess, and this was Detective McNeil's only hope. Upon hearing about Rebecca's DNA in his car, Miller fell silent. The detective kept saying they had all the evidence, and Miller could only make things easier for himself by confessing, and it worked. Miller suddenly said that he didn't kill Rebecca, but stumbled upon her body. According to him, that morning he went to his cousin's house and found an unknown man in a mask standing over Rebecca's bloody body. Clearly, the detective didn't believe this story and continued to push Miller to tell the truth. Eventually, Miller abruptly interrupted him and said, "I'm just going to tell you I did it. I'm sorry for what I did." According to Miller, that morning he went hunting in the woods near his cousin's house. When he arrived there, he suddenly remembered that his girlfriend had come over, and for some reason, he wanted to talk to her. He knocked on the door and told Rebecca he needed to use the phone. She let him in, and Miller pretended to make a call. Meanwhile, Rebecca returned to the bedroom and he began walking back and forth in the living room. Miller claimed he was overwhelmed by an uncontrollable rage and desire to kill Rebecca, so he grabbed a piano leg and went after her. She was lying on the bed and Miller struck her several times on the head before strangling her. He then wrapped her body in a sheet, put it in his pickup truck, and tried to clean the blood from the floor, walls, and bedding with bleach. He then drove to the highway and dumped the body under the embankment. Miller admitted he knew the area well because he went to school in that town. After hearing his confession, the detective asked why he committed the crime. Miller replied that he just had the urge to kill Rebecca without any reason and couldn't control it. At the end of the interrogation, he once again repeated that he regretted his actions all these years and must take responsibility. After that, Miller was arrested and extradited to Arkansas, but there he suddenly retracted his confession and claimed his innocence, which could have jeopardized the case. By law, a suspect must confess to a crime before a judge, especially when there is no evidence against them. There was also one more problem. During Miller's arrest, the police officer didn't finish reading his rights because Miller had interrupted him with a question. All this could have potentially led to Miller's release. However, the judge deemed the recorded confession admissible. Miller had the opportunity to commit the crime, knew his cousin's work schedule, and his statements matched all the details of the crime. It is worth mentioning that Miller initially had a guaranteed way to avoid punishment. When the police called him in for questioning in Oregon, he could have simply refused or walked out of the station at any moment. Considering there was no evidence against him, Miller could have refused to continue the conversation, boarded a flight to the Philippines, and left the U.S. for good, never to be held accountable. Extraditing him without evidence would have been simply impossible, and investigators would have had to accept the fact that they would never solve this case. But Detective McNeil believed that Miller himself had a strong desire to confess. His activity in the online group, where he left numerous comments and interacted with the admins, spoke to this. If he hadn't wanted anyone to learn about his involvement, the most logical behavior would have been to stay away from this topic, perhaps not leave the interrogation room, or request a lawyer for the same reason. He simply couldn't live with all this guilt. Despite Miller initially claiming his innocence, since he changed his mind again and struck a deal with the prosecution in 2022, he confessed to the crime and received a 40-year prison sentence. But this story doesn't end there. When Miller was behind bars, he suddenly confessed to several more murders. He admitted to killing 5 more women throughout his life, whose names he didn't even know. According to Miller, he would invite those women into his car, drive them to secluded places, and then kill them. He added that he chose his victims based on their appearance. He targeted young, slim, and short women with light hair. Detectives immediately realized that this description perfectly matched Rebecca's appearance. If Miller was indeed a serial killer, it would better explain his decision to kill his cousin's girlfriend, as she fits his profile. Considering that Miller worked on oil rigs for 25 years, he had lived in multiple different states and could have committed all these crimes. Police have not yet found any evidence to corroborate his claims, and the investigation continues. It is worth mentioning that there are still supporters of Miller's innocence to this day. Some don't believe he could have committed Rebecca's murder without any motive. Others think that Rebecca's boyfriend could have actually killed her, and Miller helped him dispose of the body. Some also believe that Miller didn't kill any other woman and made a false confession to the police for some reason. However, all these versions lack any substantial evidence, so Miller's guilt in Rebecca's murder is not questioned at the official level, while further investigations are ongoing regarding the other allegations. Thanks for watching. It would be great if you support the video by giving it a like. Subscribe to the channel. There are many shocking stories ahead.